Welcome to the 2025 season preview video for the Los Angeles Angels. Angels, of course, still have Mike Trout on this roster, a year removed from having Shohei Ohtani on this roster as well. They've finally begun the rebuilding phase of this organization, and it's going to take a while. It's going to be a while until they're at least competitive in the AL West. It'll be a while until they're competitive for an AL wildcard spot. Could they, of course, surprise us if Mike Trout recaptures some of his youth? Absolutely. If some of these guys have career years, sure. But I don't think any of us have a realistic expectation that the Angels are going to be the team that's pushing for the AL West crown. So I think all of us, rooted in reality, believe that the Angels, while they have some talent, that they do have some talent that's ascending, need to continue to go through this rebuild process and not try to short-circuit it, not try to do it the shortcut way. They just need to go through it, realize that they're a bad team, let themselves be bad, and let themselves grow from that experience. So without further ado, let's begin the 2025 season preview for the Los Angeles Angels. Now, the Angels last year were a pretty solid team. I think there's a way that they could do a little bit better as far as the roster itself. Let me pull up the page here for you guys. There we go. The roster itself is kind of a work in progress, though. I want to start, though, with the standings with where they finished last year. Last year, the second worst record in the American League at 63 wins. Overall, pretty good as far as from what they were expected to do. This is a team that's going through the middle of a rebuild. They're not going to be competing for much. But again, they weren't the worst team in the league. Thankfully, the White Sox took that honor for them. But it's a team that's going to need some time in order for it to get better. Looking at this roster, obviously you still have Mike Trout. He's no longer the player that he once was. Only hit about 100 plate appearances last year. He was still Mike Trout in those plate appearances. I think a full healthy season for Mike Trout is probably a 6-WAR player at best. But realistically, he's going to miss 50 to 60 games this year. Looking at the plate appearances, that's kind of reflected here in Fangraphs, where they have him at about a 3.5, almost a 4-WAR player, with about 500 plate appearances, weighted runs created plus, still elite at 139. So, still their best offensive piece. Then you get Luis Rengifo, who I believe is entering the final year of his deal. I would look for them to try to trade him at some point this year. One kind of a sneaky name and what you guys kind of keep an eye on at the trade deadline is Jorge Soler. Hit a 3-run home run in spring training the other day, and if they can get his bat right, this during this first half, he could be a name that's sought after at the deadline as well. Offense, is always going to be in demand, even if you're just a DH. And Soler certainly has the pedigree to be an elite hitter at times, and we'll see if he can, with one swing of a bat, change a series if he gets traded at the deadline. So one name to kind of keep an eye on there. Taylor Ward out there in left still. They have Noah Shanuel over there at first base. Thankfully enough for them, they did not bring in Pete Alonso, so that's a win in my book. But he'll probably be a little bit of a platoon anyway. He did have his struggles last year, so I wonder if they're going to try to ease him in this year and just try to make him as successful as possible without giving him too much on his plate. They have a really good catching tandem right now. Logan O'Hoppe, of course, is their mainstay, their catcher. Then they bring in Travis d'Arnaud via the Atlanta Braves. So I really like that addition for them. Kind of keeps their catching, really solid, day in and day out. No matter who they have on the mound, they're going to have a competent catcher behind the plate. Really like that for the Angels when they're trying to grow as a team. Of course, Anthony Rendon, not expected to be a big factor for this club. Obviously, with injury, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if he never plays one single game for the future of the Los Angeles Angels. So they bring in Yoan Moncada. I think if he has a nice year, he could be a building block for the future, kind of a veteran who kind of shepherds them into their next contending window. But realistically, I think this is a player that they should try to trade at the deadline if he's performing very well. Jo Adell, former top prospect, has never really seized that opportunity that's been given to him with the Los Angeles Angels. This might be one of his last chances to really grasp the bull by the horns here with the Angels. I think he'll be given everyday duty, and he'll be given every opportunity to win that job. And then, of course, they have Tim Anderson as a non-roster invitee, possibly taking the job out there at shortstop. The one name you don't notice here is Zach Neto. And if we scroll down here, you'll notice that some of these players are going to be injured for the foreseeable future. Rendon, obviously, just had hip surgery. I would expect him to miss all of the entire 2025 season. As far as Zach Neto, he was a pretty good player for them last year. I believe he was darn near 5 WAR last year, and primarily based on the defensive abilities that he has. Offense is starting to come around, but he did have off-season shoulder surgery. Not sure when the timetable is that he'll be back at the moment, but he is going to miss some time to begin the season. Looking at their bench, we just mentioned Travis d'Arnaud. They also have J.D. Davis, anyway, not J.D. Martinez. But a good bench bat for them, kind of utilize him at first and third. And then, of course, they have Kevin Newman, former top prospect of the Pittsburgh Pirates. If I remember correctly, he was drafted in the first round. And then Mickey Moniak. This is a player that's probably going to play a fair amount this year if Mike Trout goes down due to injury or if Jo Adell can't hack it at the major league level. Any one of those options is a possibility here for the Angels. Welcome in, Holly. Appreciate you joining us once again. Stanley, welcome in. The Mets will make the World Series. Well, I'd say they have a good chance at it in the NL. I'd say the Dodgers are the prohibitive favorites in the entire league to win the World Series, let alone reach the World Series. And then on the National League side, I guess you'd probably have to put the Mets in that 2, 3, 4 spot, depending on who your favorite team is and how you see their rotation ultimately getting them through the postseason. But for the Mets, I think they have a really good lineup. The question is, can that rotation stay healthy? So far, they've got 2 of their top 4 starters already down right now due to injury. And then I think they're going to have to add a number 1 anyway on top of getting those guys back and healthy. So we'll see if they address those needs. But for the Angels here, for their season preview, I like what they've got as far as a lineup. I think they got a lot of older veteran-type players who are going to be consistent enough in the first half of the year where they should be able to parlay those pieces into some future prospects for them. Do not be fooled by this roster and say, hey, maybe they're a 500 team around the All-Star break with this lineup. If they can keep it together, maybe they should try to push for a wild card. No, that's not what you do here. You look at the guys here in this lineup. You got a Mike Trout that's almost 34 years old. Rengifo is 28 years old. Taylor Ward is a 31 going on 32. Jorge Soler, 33. Then you get Yoan Moncada, almost 30 years old. Tim Anderson, almost 32. This is a team that's a very veteran-laden roster on the major league level. And so they should be at least major league level type of talent on the roster there. They should be able to peddle a bunch of those guys for, borderline top 20 prospects from a club. That's what they should be doing around the trade deadline. If this is a team that has this many veterans on it after the trade deadline, and they haven't released them to, allow them to go and find a club out there, if they can't trade them at the deadline, allow younger players to come up and at least get their feet wet at the major league level, I would say this is a miss of a season for them. I think they'll do the right thing here, because I think they realize, in the front office at least, that this is not a contending team. Even with a healthy Mike Trout, when they had Mike Trout in his prime and Shohei Ohtani in his prime, they couldn't get the ball across the finish line, across that goal line. They couldn't ever get it into the end zone because that talent never showed through. They never got through to a postseason series. And while as good as that team, as those two players were, it wasn't good enough to drag that club, out of the lottery and into the postseason. So you ain't going to do it with Mike Trout, who's only going to be able to play maybe 100 games, Rengifo, who's on the final year of his deal, Soler, who basically was sold to the Angels to kind of save some money, Shanuel, who has his ups and downs as a prospect, and with your top player, Zach Neto, starting the season off injured. Not a good start here for the Angels as far as where they're at as a roster. So I think you have to be very realistic for the expectations of this team. Looking at their rotation, they bring in Yusei Kikuchi. I thought that deal was a little bit of a miss for me. A little bit too rich. This is a team that should be trying to sell pieces at the deadline, and they basically gave Kikuchi max value for what he was worth on the market. There's no way, unless you're retaining some serious salary in that deal, that you're going to be able to get a nice return in exchange for him at the deadline. They should have been signing 1, maybe 2-year deals, not 3 years at top market value for a Yusei Kikuchi. I get it, you don't have a number 1 on this roster, so be it. Bring in outside guys like a Kyle Hendricks like you did just before this deal on a 1-year low-cost contract that if you catch fire, absolutely great, you trade him at the deadline. If you don't, you DFA him and allow the young guys to play after the trade deadline. There's no impetus to try to win games right now. It's all about process, making sure the young players that you bring in, do things the right way, are going about their habits the right way, eating right, fielding well, learning how to have professional at-bats, those kinds of things. You have plenty of veterans on this roster to do that without spending at the top of the market on a Yusei Kikuchi. Now, one player that did have success for them last year, Jose Siriano, probably going to be penciled in as their number 2. But as you can see, he's only got about 2 years of service time. They're expecting right around a 4 ERA for him. There are only 2 pitchers that are going to be above a 2 WAR according to them are Kikuchi and Soriano. So hopefully their 3-4-5 can pick it up, those being Tyler Anderson, former guy who played for the Los Angeles Dodgers, parlayed that into a 3-year, $39 million deal after denying the qualifying offer a few years ago from the Dodgers. Kyle Hendricks, a former top of the rotation starter for the Chicago Cubs, obviously has seen better days, but a good veteran for the young starters that they're going to have coming in the system. Reed Detmers, who was probably their number 2, number 3 starter last year, is only 25, about to be 26 years old. Could be a 1.5 WAR player according to Fangraphs. Not a bad rotation, but certainly nothing to write home about. As far as the bullpen, they had a lot of veterans in there last year. They're going to have a lot of veterans once again this year, but they've mixed in a little bit more youth, a little bit here. They bring in Kenley Jansen. Of course, he's 37 years old. I would expect them to try to trade him at the deadline. He'd only signed, I believe, a 1-year deal with them. Ben Joyce could easily slide back into that closer role. He was pretty dominant last year out of the bullpen. They're expecting about a 3.5 WAR season, or excuse me, a 3.5 ERA season for him. I have big hopes for him. As far as Brock Burke, kind of a failed prospect with the Texas Rangers, hopefully you can get him some veteran innings out of that bullpen there. Then you get Ryan Zefferjan, Jose Quijada, Hans Kraus, another former top prospect anyway of the Rangers, Jose Suarez, and Garrett McDaniels. Overall, the back end of the bullpen with Kenley Jansen and Ben Joyce in good hands. The rest of it, not as good as it was last year. They had a lot of veterans back there. Luis Garcia, who just signed a minor league deal about a week ago with the Los Angeles Dodgers, could ultimately break camp with them. And then you also had Matt Moore and several other guys. Carlos Estevez comes to mind in that bullpen. They don't have those same guys this year. Injured pitchers anyway. Robert Stevenson is the only one with Tommy John. He could be back at some point later on this season as well. Looking at their minor league talent here, at their catchers, nobody here really that catches the eye. First base, nothing there really. Second, got a couple of prospects they might be relying on. Christian Moore is the top one there. They're expecting him to get his feet wet at the major league level. He's a AAA player. Projected, right now he's only been at AA, so we'll see how he ultimately acquits himself at the major league level. Carter Kieboom, a top prospect of the Nationals, has found a home here with the Angels as well. Hopefully he can play a little bit this year for them, but again, third base is kind of a black hole for them. We'll see how much production they can get. Scott Kingery, another former top prospect, this one of the Philadelphia Phillies. Notice how the Angels are going veteran heavy with a lot of failed prospects like a Yoan Moncada, Scott Kingery, Kevin Newman, players like that. Those are the type of players that if they hit, then maybe they could be a part of your future going forward. We'll have to see how this roster really acquits itself. Going on to third base, nothing really there. Starting pitchers, Caden Dana is a player I'm expecting them to utilize a little bit. Pitched very well last year in the minor leagues, got a taste of the major league action last year, pitched around a 10 ERA in 3 starts though. They're going to hope for a little bit better of a start to his season in his second cup of coffee with the Angels this year. I expect they'll be a little bit more cautious with bringing him up. That's why they went a little bit more veteran heavy at the top. And then he could be one of those guys that's for sure in the rotation after the trade deadline. And then, of course, as far as relievers, nobody really here that kind of jumps out at us that could make the roster as well. But again, they're going to need some arms, so these are the names that they'll have. Brogdon, a veteran there, Michael Peterson as well, among others. Overall, where does their payroll currently sit? Last year, they sat around 176. This year, they're around 202. That's a hefty payroll for a team that's probably going to finish at best 4th in the division, more likely 5th. And looking at the payroll, where they're getting their money spent, they're spending, $70 million between Mike Trout and Anthony Rendon. They might get 100 games out of Mike Trout, total this season. Anthony Rendon, they probably don't get anything out of. Kikuchi, they're paying at top market value, $21 million a year. They basically got Jorge Soler because they took on the contract there of $16 million. That's a lot of money, and then Tyler Anderson comes off the books after the year at $13. Overall, just a lot of money being doled out for a team that's not going to be very good. And this is kind of the issue I have with the Angels, is that this team should be a lot cheaper for what the talent is on the field. If they had just kept the money from Kikuchi, maybe take the money of Soler, you take it back, and you bring in pieces along with it, so be it, I get it. But for me, this is a team that should be trying to save as much money as they can in free agency while they're going to be a bad team. And if they're going to take on money, they should do it via trade and take on bad contracts from other clubs and use it as a way of buying prospects. We've seen other clubs do it before. And I think that would be a really smart way to go about building your prospect base if you're the Los Angeles Angels. Looking at their payroll estimates this year, with arbitration guys and everything, their luxury tax payroll is expected to be around 220. Remember, threshold is 241 for that first threshold. Nowhere near where you want it to be if you're in this bad of a straits as a team. So hopefully they can get their payroll right over the next couple of years. Next year, their payroll before arbitration, 143. With arbitration, probably looking 165. Not a huge drop as far as I'm concerned, nowhere near the level where it needs to be. And then you get into the years later on where you get down to 79, 58, 59, 59 as far as guaranteed deals. Factor in between $20 and $30 million in arbitration on top of all those numbers. And then you can begin to see where they'll have money. They'll probably have a little bit of money in 27. That if this team has got a nice offensive group on the field, maybe they use those free agent dollars to add some starting pitching at that point. But this was not the offseason to do it for a guy like Kikuchi. But we'll see what their long-term plan is for that rotation. Right now, I like the idea of bringing in some veterans and allowing them to kind of keep this team afloat in the first half, allowing those young guys to learn behind them. And then once the second half hits, allow the young guys to come in, get their feet wet, get some experience, those kinds of things. Wins of the offseason for me, I like the addition of Kenley Jansen quite a bit. Looking at their depth chart here, I want them just to stay healthy more than anything else. I want Zach Neto to get back to the Major League roster. I hope for them to get a healthy season out of Mike Trout. I thought they should have traded Luis Rengifo. I don't think there's any big loss, though, in trading him at the deadline. I don't think that the return that they would get now versus at the deadline is going to be too different from what the alternative would be here. But as far as the win here is not going out there and adding a guy like Santander, adding a guy like Pete Alonso. I think that's the real win here, not allowing Artie Moreno to, quote, make a big splash like we were expecting all offseason long. Thankfully, we haven't seen that yet, and I hope we don't see one because, again, this is a team that's set to go through a rebuild phase, and it could take a while after they had a complete organizational malpractice anyway when they handled the end of the Shohei Ohtani era there in Los Angeles. Alrighty, holes on this roster for me. I think they could use some more veterans, honestly. or low-cost guys, failed prospects in other systems, guys who just need to be given some more of a chance. So, for instance, the Texas Rangers still need a closer, and let's go ahead and do a trade first. Now, I don't think this will happen, but it's something that would make sense, at least for both clubs. Say the Rangers just can't figure out their closer situation, and Kenley Jansen is still sitting out there. Negative 2.1. You trade him to the Rangers. Say you trade, or you send about $6 million, because that'll be about what he's worth at the deadline as well, to the Rangers. Now you could get about a 4 prospect back. Now the Rangers have a ton of middle infield prospects that they could send the other way. I would guess they would prefer some pitching prospects first. So maybe a guy like Teodo or Winston Santos could go the other way. But I would guess a guy like Ezekiel Duran would hold a lot of value for the Los Angeles Angels as well. And it would kind of clear up a little bit of a logjam from a positional standpoint for the Texas Rangers. So if he ever reaches that prospect status, then yes, that would kind of hurt. But for a team that's trying to win a World Series this year, this is not a bad return in exchange for Kenley Jansen. I mean, you're basically still going to have Josh Smith at the Major League level. You'll probably have Jonathan Ornelas. You'll probably have Justin Foscue at the Major League level as well. Kind of a lot of redundancies on the Rangers roster. So trading one of those guys, like Ezekiel Duran, like a Josh Smith, to kind of free up some flexibility there as far as your roster construction is concerned would be wise. And their primary position of need right now is a closer, along with some innings eaters in that starting staff. So this would be a trade I could see happening either at the deadline or sometime earlier in the year. So we'll validate it. We'll post it to the trade board. Not a bad deal overall. Alrighty, so expectations for the Los Angeles Angels for 2025. Again, I'm not expecting them to do much based off of where they finished last year. 63 wins. I think the rosiest of outcomes after the addition of Kikuchi probably puts them in that 68 win threshold. I don't think they break 70 this year, even with those veterans. I think this is still going to be a team that struggles to put together W's. I think the sum of the parts is actually less than the actual talent that they have. And while Ron Washington, I think, will make them play better defensively, and usually a good manager helps make the sum of the parts better than what they actually are, I just don't think that's the case here with the Angels. Too many veterans here, not enough youth mixed in, and I think they're going to go too veteran heavy in the first half and then too young in the second half to where they haven't struck the right balance yet. But again, it's early in their rebuild phase, and you're going to have those hiccups along the way, and I think this year is going to be one of those hiccups for them. Love Ron Washington as a manager. I hope he gets a chance to stick around after this team starts to get good again, but I doubt he will. Most clubs usually like to go with another manager who can actually lead them to the promised land, somebody who has a better track record of success, who didn't have to deal with all those years of losing with the team and building up those players, have them come in with a fresh ideas, fresh approach, all those kinds of things is usually the direction teams ultimately go. But I hope for Ron Washington and for baseball, he gets to stay as manager once they get good again. As far as expectations for the roster, I'm hoping Mike Trout stayed healthy. I think the best case for him would be to play him at DH. Looking at this depth chart here, they're currently penciling Jorge Soler in there at DH. I would personally split them both in the outfield. I'd play a little bit of Soler, I'd play a little bit of Trout just to keep both guys healthy. I think that's the best case scenario for them. In that case, maybe he does reach 500 plate appearances because he hasn't been able to do it each of the last couple of years. Hopefully he can stay healthy for the sake of the Los Angeles Angels. Overall, I just think this is a very veteran-laden roster that's not very good at the top, and it's going to cost them a lot of games. The bullpen does have a couple of nice options at the very back, but nothing in the middle innings that gives me confidence that they're going to be able to make it to those late innings to where you have some shutdown guys there. So it's going to be a tough year for Angels fans, and I'm just glad they didn't make a big mistake and do Alonso or Santander or Bregman or any of the other big bats that are out there. Or big free agents that were out there. Very happy Perry Menezian and the rest of the front office stood up to some degree here, finally, to their owner, Artie Moreno, and his request to make a big splash in free agency. So far, we haven't seen it yet. As far as any big trades, I don't see any big ones here. You're not going to trade Mike Trout. Too much money on that contract. You're not going to trade at least Jorge Soler at this moment until he rebuilds his value. Kikuchi got too much money on that contract now, not going to be able to move that one. You're going to try to move some of these smaller pieces, Rengifo, Moncada, Adele, if he ultimately doesn't pan out. Tim Anderson, if he does work well in the first half, you trade him away and you put Neto in there once he is healthy. But this is a team that's going to be in rebuilding phase for at least each of the next couple of years, and hopefully they can strike the right balance between veterans and younger players next off season. But right now, I think they're a little too veteran heavy, and it's going to hurt them as far as development at the major league level. I get it; they want to be a solid team, professional on the field. But this is a time where you need to be trying to maximize your future assets, and by having some spots freed up here for some younger players would be the best case scenario, and mix in a little bit of veteran talent along the way, just to kind of keep those guys in the right frame of mind as far as what it means to go to work every single day, right process, right approach, all those kinds of things would be invaluable to young players as they continue to progress from the minors to the majors. As far as a grade for the offseason, I'll give them a solid C, just because they didn't make a big mistake like Santander or Alonso, but I also can't go higher than that because I really did not like that contract for Kikuchi. I thought they should have split that deal up between at least 2 or 3 other starting pitchers or some veterans for that bullpen. That way they can rebuild their prospect base on the fly and trade some of those guys at the deadline and see what kind of team they have going forward after that. But as far as an offseason grade, a solid C for me. Growth and surprises, looking at where this roster currently is. Maybe they surprise us with Mike Trout being healthy and they get all the way up to, say, like a 75-win team. I don't think they're much better than that, even in their best day, but maybe they'll surprise us. But as far as the ceiling of this team, I would say it's probably around that 75-win mark. I don't think there's any prayer they're getting into the top 3 in the AL West. I think there's a case to be made that the Athletics could fall behind them just a little bit here. But that's with career years for a lot of guys on that Angels roster. I just don't see that happening. So more realistically, you're going to be around that same win total that you were last year, maybe a little bit better. Maybe in that 65 to 68 win threshold with some of the veterans that you do have on that roster. But honestly, I think the more likely option here is if you're going to get to the floor. Say you go from 63 wins to, say, about a 59, 58 win ball club, because again, this team just doesn't have any juice on it, especially if Mike Trout is injured. I think the first half of the year will be really telling for where the future of this franchise is headed, from the pieces that they're calling up and pieces that they're allowing to get some experience at the major league level. Alrighty, appreciate you guys joining us. We've done a few of our lives this morning, and this later on this afternoon. It's almost 5 o'clock, a little after 5 o'clock now Central Time. We'll do one more video for certain today on the Mariners. There's 2025 season preview video. Will be coming out a little bit later on this evening. We'll probably do that one around 7-ish. And then the final video tonight, I didn't think we'd get this many done today, is for the Atlanta Braves. We'll probably spend a little bit more time on them because they are going to be a competitive team this year. They are going to push for a wild card. They could push for the division, and they could make the playoffs. So that's going to be one that you guys are not going to want to miss later on this evening. If you guys have missed any of our other 2025 season preview videos, I encourage you guys to check those out here at the Upside. Be sure to hit that like, subscribe, comment on those videos. Tell us where you guys think the Angels are going to finish this year. Where do you guys think the Cubs, the Dodgers, any one of the other teams we've already done? Please feel free to check those out here on YouTube. Follow us on X at UpsideSN and on Facebook at Upside Sports Network. Alrighty, we'll be back here around 7 o'clock to do the Seattle Mariners, their update or their 2025 season preview video for them. So we'll have to see, check out that video as well. We'll touch on a lot of Logan Gilbert and George Kirby in there, as well as the offense, what that lineup is really going to look like. Do they have enough? Do they not? That and much, much more ahead later this evening. But thank you guys for joining us. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you in just a couple hours.